Emily Grant stood at the panoramic window of her penthouse, absently stroking the rim of her champagne glass. The lights of New York City twinkled below, but her thoughts were far away. In her 35 years, she was one of the youngest millionaires in the country, but the feeling of dissatisfaction never left her. "Is this really all I'm capable of? Just enjoy being rich," she muttered, turning away from the window. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to the television. A familiar face flashed across the screen. Jason Foster, CEO of Golden Eagle, one of the largest corporations in the country. "And we're proud that Golden Eagle continues to grow and thrive, creating new jobs and innovation," Jason spoke from the screen. Emily snorted. She knew Jason personally. They'd crossed paths at fundraisers. Something about his smile always seemed fake to her. Suddenly, it hit her. This was it. This was what she could do. Emily grabbed her phone and dialed the number. "Sarah, it's me. I need your help. How would you feel about doing a little investigating?" The next morning, Emily met with Sarah Chen, her trusty assistant, at a small cafe. "So, boss, what crazy thing are you up to this time?" Sarah asked, looking at Emily inquisitively. Emily leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I want to infiltrate the Golden Eagle disguised as a journalist. Something's not clean there, I can feel it." Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. "Are you out of your mind? That's one of the biggest corporations in the country. They must have tons of security and inspections." "Which is exactly why I need your help," Emily smiled. "You're a genius at creating false identities. Will you make me into a journalist?" Sarah rolled her eyes, but Emily knew she was already intrigued. "And how are you going to explain your sudden disappearance from social life?" "Let's say I went on an extended trip, a yoga retreat in India or something." Sarah sighed. "Okay, I'm in. But be warned, if we get caught, I'll blame it all on you." Emily laughed. "That's a deal. Now let's talk details." The next 2 weeks flew by like a day. Sarah worked tirelessly to create a new identity for Emily, Jessica Parker, an ambitious young journalist. Emily, on the other hand, was diligently learning the basics of journalism and corporate investigations. Finally, it was X Day. Emily, now Jessica, stood in front of the mirror in her new apartment, a small studio in Brooklyn. "How's it going?" she asked Sarah, adjusting her thin-rimmed glasses. Sarah gave her a critical look. "You look like a typical journalist. No one would think you're a millionaire." "Fine." Emily took a deep breath. "So, is it time to go?" "Good luck, boss." Sarah squeezed her hand. "And be careful." Emily nodded and headed out the door, ready to begin her investigation. The Golden Eagle office was breathtaking in its grandeur. The glass skyscraper seemed to rest against the very sky. Emily, now fully into her role as Jessica, nervously rubbed the strap of her bag as she waited in the lobby. "Miss Parker?" a voice called out. Emily turned around and saw a young woman with a clipboard in her hands. "I'm Lisa Rodriguez, the company spokeswoman. Welcome to the Golden Eagle." "Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here." Emily smiled, trying to look both professional and a little nervous, as befitted a young journalist. Lisa led her through the security turnstiles and led her to the elevators. "Mr. Foster is looking forward to meeting you. He's always happy to support young journalists." "That's very kind of him," Emily replied, mentally preparing herself for the upcoming meeting. Jason Foster's office was on the top floor of the building. When the elevator doors opened, Emily froze for a moment, amazed at the view of the city that opened up. "Impressive, isn't it?" came a deep male voice. Emily turned around and saw Jason Foster standing in the doorway of his office. He was just as she remembered him, tall, trim, with perfectly styled graying hair and a piercing gaze. "Mr. Foster, thank you for agreeing to this interview." Emily extended her hand to shake. "Please call me Jason," he smiled, shaking her hand. "Come in, make yourself comfortable." The office was huge with panoramic windows and minimalist design. Jason gestured for Emily to take a seat in the leather chair across from his desk. "So, Miss Parker, what would you like to talk about?" he asked, sitting down in his chair. Emily pulled out a notepad and a tape recorder. "Well, for starters, I'd like to hear about Golden Eagle's recent accomplishments. Your company has shown impressive growth in recent years." Jason smiled wider. "Oh, that's my favorite subject. You see, the secret to our success." Emily spent the next hour listening intently, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. Jason spoke smoothly and confidently, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right here. "What about your overseas projects?" she asked, noticing Jason tense for a split second. "Oh, that's a very promising area," he replied after a short pause. "We're actively developing our branches in Asia and South America." "Interesting," Emily made a note. "And would it be possible to find out more about the financials of those branches?" Jason frowned slightly. "I'm afraid that information is confidential, but I can tell you that we're very pleased with the results." Emily nodded, realizing she was onto something interesting. "Of course, I understand. And who is responsible for the financial side of these projects?" "That is the area of responsibility of our CFO, Michael Douglas," Jason replied. "By the way, here he is." A middle-aged man entered the office, nervously adjusting his tie. "Jason, Oh, I apologize. I didn't realize you had a meeting." "That's okay, Michael." Jason waved his hand. "Meet Jessica Parker, a journalist. She's writing an article about our company." Michael turned noticeably pale. "A journalist? Nice to meet you." Emily smiled, noting his reaction. "Likewise, Mr. Douglas. Perhaps you could spare me some time for an interview, too." "I'm afraid I'm very busy today," Michael muttered. "But perhaps some other time." "Of course, I understand," Emily nodded. "I'll be here for a few more days, so hopefully we'll find some time." Michael nodded awkwardly and walked quickly out of the office. Jason escorted him out with a glance, then turned to Emily. "I apologize for that, Miss Parker. Michael is a very busy man." "That's okay," Emily smiled. "I'll still have the opportunity to interview him." After the interview, Emily walked out of the Golden Eagle building feeling that she was on the right track. She immediately called Sarah. "How did it go?" Sarah asked, as soon as she answered the phone. "Interesting," Emily replied, looking around. "I think I fumbled something about their overseas projects, and the CFO has been acting really weird. Do you think there's something fishy going on there?" "I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to keep digging. Sarah, I need you to check out everything you can find about their branches in Asia and South America." "Will do, boss. Be careful." Emily spent the next few days in the Golden Eagle office, talking to the staff and gathering information. She tried to be friendly and open, making people feel comfortable in her presence. On the third day, she ran into Lisa Rodriguez in the company cafeteria. "Jessica, how's your article coming along?" Lisa asked, taking a seat at Emily's table. "Great, thank you," Emily smiled. "Everyone is very friendly and open." Lisa nodded. "Yeah, we have a great staff, although—" "What?" Emily leaned forward, sensing that Lisa wanted to say something. Lisa looked around and lowered her voice. "Nothing, it's just the atmosphere has been a bit tense lately, especially in the finance department." "Really?" Emily tried to sound casual. "What's the matter?" "I don't know exactly," Lisa shrugged. "But Michael Douglas has been kind of twitchy lately, and he's always locking himself in his office with some paperwork." Emily made a mental note. "Maybe it's just a lot of work." "Maybe." Lisa didn't look convinced. "But you know what's weird? The other day I overheard him talking on the phone in some foreign language. I think it was Spanish." "Interesting," Emily piped up. "Does he travel a lot on business trips?" "Oh, yes. always flying back and forth to Asia and South America, checking up on the branches, he says. Emily felt her pulse quicken. She was sure she'd hit the mark. "Thank you, Lisa. You've been very helpful," she smiled. "You're welcome," Lisa replied. "Just please don't tell anyone I told you this. I don't want any trouble." "Of course, don't worry," Emily assured her. After her conversation with Lisa, Emily was determined to dig deeper. She decided it was time to talk to Michael Douglas in person. The next day, she spied him outside the elevator. "Mr. Douglas, it's good to see you again," she smiled as she stepped into the elevator with him. Michael nodded nervously. "Miss Parker, hello. I kept hoping to find time to interview you. Perhaps you might have a couple minutes today?" Michael visibly tensed. I'm really busy today. Maybe another time." Emily decided to take a chance. "I see. Must be a lot of work with overseas affiliates." Michael turned sharply toward her. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing much," Emily smiled innocently. "Just heard that you fly around a lot on business trips. It must be interesting working with different cultures." "Yes. Yeah. Sure," Michael muttered. The elevator stopped and he got out quickly. "Excuse me, I have to go." Emily stared after him, feeling that she was on the right track. She decided to call Sarah. "Sarah, did you find anything about the overseas branches?" "Oh, I sure did," Sarah replied. "You wouldn't believe what I've discovered. It seems that some of these branches only exist on paper." "What do you mean?" "I checked the addresses. Some of them lead to empty lots or to completely different companies. And the financial statements. Something doesn't add up there." Emily felt adrenaline pulsing through her veins. "Sarah, you're a genius. Can you send me everything you found?" "Already sending it. But be careful, Em. If it's what I think it is, you've gotten yourself into a very dangerous business." "Don't worry. I'll be careful," Emily assured her. That evening, Emily sat in her small apartment studying the documents that Sarah had sent. The more she read, the more convinced she became that she was on the trail of a major financial scam. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Emily tensed. She wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously approaching the door, she asked, "Who is it?" "Miss Parker? This is Robert Kingsley from the Golden Eagle. I need to speak with you." Emily hesitated. She remembered Robert. He was a board member she'd met at the office. He seemed like an honest man, but she couldn't trust anyone right now. "It's getting late, Mr. Kingsley. How about tomorrow?" "Please. This is very important. This is about safety." Something in his voice made Emily open the door. Standing in front of her was Robert Kingsley, looking very worried. "May I come in?" he asked, looking around. Emily nodded and let him in. As soon as the door closed, Robert spoke. "Miss Parker, I know you're not who you say you are." Emily felt her heart drop at her heels. "I don't know what you mean." "Look," Robert interrupted her. "I know who you really are, Miss Grant, and I know what you're investigating." Emily froze. "How do you—" "That's not important." Robert shook his head. "What's important is that you're in danger. Jason and Michael know someone is digging for them. They're panicking." "So it's true then? Financial fraud?" Robert nodded. "I suspected it a long time ago, but couldn't prove anything. Now they're covering their tracks, shredding documents, intimidating people." "Why are you telling me this?" Emily asked. "Because I can't keep quiet anymore," Robert replied. "I've tried to fight it from the inside, but I've been unsuccessful. When I saw that you had started investigating, I decided to help." Emily looked at him carefully. "How do I know I can trust you?" Robert pulled a flash drive out of his pocket. "Here's the evidence. Financial statements, records of negotiations, everything I've been able to gather. I'm risking everything by handing this over to you." Emily took the flash drive, feeling her hands shaking. "What do I do now?" "Be careful," Robert said. "They're dangerous people. If you can publicize this information—" Suddenly there was a loud knock on the door. "Police, open up!" Emily and Robert looked over to each other. "Shit," Robert whispered. "They're already here." "What do we do?" Emily asked in a panic. Robert looked around quickly. "Is there another way out?" "The fire escape." Emily nodded. "Okay, here's what we'll do." At that moment, the door rattled open and uniformed men burst into the apartment. "Don't move!" shouted one of them. Emily froze in place, feeling her heart ready to jump out of her chest. Robert slowly raised his hands. "Gentlemen, I think there's some misunderstanding here," he said calmly. "Robert Kingsley?" one of the officers asked. "You're under arrest on suspicion of industrial espionage and stealing corporate secrets." Emily couldn't believe her ears. "No, this is a mistake. And who are you?" The officer turned to her. I'm a journalist, Jessica Parker. I'm working on an article about the Golden Eagle." The officer frowned. "We have no information on the journalist. You'll have to come with us for identification." Emily felt panic overwhelm her. She looked at Robert, who subtly shook his head as if to say, "Don't fight it." As they were being led out of the building, Emily noticed a familiar figure watching from a dark car. It was Jason Foster. A smug smile played across his face. At the police station, Emily and Robert were separated. Emily was placed in a small interrogation room. She sat there feeling time dragging on interminably. Finally, the door opened and a detective walked in. "So, Miss Parker, or should I call you Miss Grant?" Emily flinched. "How did you—" "We have our sources," the detective replied dryly. "You're getting into a very dangerous game, Miss Grant. Industrial espionage is a serious charge." "It isn't," Emily exclaimed. "I investigated financial fraud at the Golden Eagle. I have proof." The detective raised an eyebrow. "Evidence? And where is it?" Emily froze. The flash drive Robert had given her remained in the apartment. They're in my apartment, on the flash drive." "Interesting," the detective piped up, "because our officers didn't find any flash drive when they searched the place." Emily felt the ground go from under her feet. "But it was there. Robert Kingsley gave it to me right before we were arrested. Mr. Kingsley claims you blackmailed him by threatening to reveal some compromising data if he didn't give you inside information about the company." "What?" Emily couldn't believe her ears. "That's a lie. He came to me himself to help me uncover the truth." The detective shook his head. "We have witness statements that corroborate Mr. Kingsley's version of events, as well as a recording of a phone conversation where you discuss plans with one Sarah Chen to infiltrate the company under a false name." Emily felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. They'd tapped her phone. They knew everything from the beginning. "Look," she tried to gather her thoughts. "I did infiltrate the company under a false identity, but only because I suspected illegal activity. I can explain everything." "You'll have that opportunity," the detective said, standing up. "At your trial. In the meantime, you remain in custody." As the detective walked out, Emily wrapped her arms around her head. How could things have gone so wrong? She was sure she had uncovered a major scam, and now she found herself in custody herself, with no evidence and no way to prove anything. Suddenly, the door opened again. Emily looked up and saw Sarah. "Sarah, how did you end up here?" Sarah looked around quickly and whispered, "We don't have much time. I came in disguised as your lawyer." "But how did you know?" "I've been following you, remember? When I saw you were arrested, I sprang into action right away. Listen carefully, Em. I found the flash drive in your apartment. They didn't take it." Emily felt hope return to her. "You looked through it?" Sarah nodded. "It's all there. Financial records, conversation notes, evidence of dummy affiliates. It's enough to sink the Golden Eagle." "But what do we do now? I'm being accused of industrial espionage." Sarah smiled. "I have a plan, but you'll have to trust me." At that moment, the door opened again and a guard entered. "Time's up." Sarah nodded and turned to Emily. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. When Sarah left, Emily was left alone in her cell, full of anxiety and hope. She didn't know what Sarah was up to, but this was her only chance. The next few days passed like a blur. Emily was interrogated, shown some documents, demanded to sign a confession. She refused, insisting on her innocence, but she felt the walls closing in around her. On the fourth day, she was suddenly released. As Emily walked out of the police station building, she saw Sarah waiting for her with a wide smile. "What happened?" Emily asked, hugging her friend. "You're not going to believe this," Sarah replied, leading Emily to the car. "Let's go. I'll tell you all about it on the way." As they got into the car, Sarah began her story. "Remember when I said I had a plan? Well, I contacted Lisa Rodriguez." "With the Golden Eagle spokeswoman?" Emily asked in surprise. "Exactly," Sarah nodded. "Turns out she suspected something was fishy at the company too. When I told her about your arrest and showed her the contents of the flash drive, she decided to help." "And what did she do?" "She organized a leak of information, anonymously submitted some of the documents to several major publications, and then, you won't believe this, she went to Robert Kingsley." Emily awed. "To Robert? But he betrayed me." Sarah shook her head. "Not exactly. Turns out Jason Foster was blackmailing him. Robert has a sick daughter, and Jason threatened to stop paying for her treatment if Robert didn't testify against you." "Oh my God," Emily whispered. "And now what?" "When Lisa showed Robert the evidence and told him about the leak, he decided he had nothing more to lose. He went to the police and confessed to everything, told them about the shenanigans, the blackmail, everything." Emily couldn't believe her ears. "And that's why they let me go?" "Yes, but that's not all," Sarah smiled. "While you were in custody, a real scandal broke. Golden Eagle's stock plummeted, the audits started. Jason Foster and Michael Douglas tried to flee the country, but they were detained at the airport." Emily leaned back in her seat, trying to make sense of everything she'd heard. "I can't believe it's over." "Oh, it's not over," Sarah said cryptically. "You've become quite a sensation. A millionaire who became a journalist to expose corporate corruption. Everyone wants to interview you." Emily groaned. "Oh no, not again." "Oh yes," Sarah laughed. "But don't worry, I've already made a plan. We're going to use this situation to bring attention to the issue of corporate ethics and the need for stricter oversight of large companies." Emily looked at her friend gratefully. "What would I do without you, Sarah?" "Sitting in jail right now," Sarah winked. "Now let's get you ready for the press conference. We've got a lot of work to do." The next few weeks flew by like a blur. Emily gave interviews, appeared on television, and participated in discussions about corporate ethics. Her story became a sensation, sparking widespread discussion about corporate corruption. One evening, sitting in her penthouse suite, looking out at the lights of New York City at night, Emily reflected on how her life had changed. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. "Who is it?" she asked, walking to the door. "It's me, Robert Kingsley," came a familiar voice. Emily hesitated for a second, but then opened the door. Robert stood in front of her, looking tired but calm. "May I come in?" he asked. Emily nodded and let him in. They walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. "I wanted to apologize," Robert began, "for letting you down the other day at the police station." Emily shook her head. "You have nothing to apologize for. Sarah told me about your situation. I understand why you did what you did." Robert smiled sadly. "I feel guilty anyway. But that's not the only reason I came. I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" Emily wondered. "For not giving up. For seeing this through to the end. Thanks to you, the truth came out, and now a lot is going to change." Emily nodded. "I hope so. But tell me, how is your daughter? Is she okay?" Robert's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, she's fine. After the story went public, several clinics offered free treatment. You know, I thought I was doing it all for her, agreeing to Jason's machinations, but now I realize I was actually letting her down. What kind of example was I setting for her? Emily put a hand on his shoulder. You were protecting your daughter. Maybe not in the best way, but with the best of intentions. Now you have a chance to make things right. Robert nodded. Yes, you're right, and I'm going to take advantage of it. I've decided to start a foundation to help children with rare diseases. I want to use my knowledge and connections to help other families in a similar situation. That's a wonderful idea, Emily smiled. If you need help, I'd love to get involved. Thank you, Robert stood up. I'd better get going. Just wanted you to know, what you've done has really changed a lot of people's lives. After Robert left, Emily stood at the window for a long time, looking out over the city. She remembered how just a few months ago she had felt empty and useless. And now she knew she had the power to make a difference in the world. The ringing of the phone brought her out of her reverie. It was Sarah. You won't believe what I just found out, she began excitedly. What is it? Emily asked, feeling her pulse quicken. She already knew that when Sarah spoke in that tone of voice, it meant the beginning of a new adventure. Remember that pharmaceutical company we talked about? The one that drastically raised the prices of life-saving drugs? Yes, of course, Emily replied. What about it? I have some insider information. It seems there's something very wrong going on there. Faking clinical trial results, bribing officials. I think we should look into it. Emily felt a familiar excitement sweep over her. Part of her wanted to say, no, I've had enough adventures. But the other part, the part that had always sought justice, was already fired up about the idea of a new investigation. Okay, she said after a pause. Let's meet tomorrow and talk it over, but we'll proceed more carefully this time. Of course, Sarah agreed. No pretending to be a journalist. We'll use your real name and reputation this time. After talking to Sarah, Emily couldn't sleep for a long time afterward. She thought about how her life had changed, about the people she had helped, the people she could still help. In the morning, she was awakened by a call from Lisa Rodriguez. Emily, I'm sorry it's so early. I thought you should know this. Jason Foster has agreed to a plea deal. He'll testify against the other participants in the scheme. That's good news, Emily said, rubbing her eyes. Thanks for letting me know. There's something else, Lisa continued. I've been invited to be the head of a new commission on ethics in business. We'll be making recommendations to prevent similar situations in the future. I was wondering, maybe you'd like to join. Your experience would be very valuable. Emily thought for a moment. This was an opportunity to change the system from within, to influence the corporate culture nationwide. And that's a great idea, she replied. Let's meet and discuss the details. After talking to Lisa, Emily felt a surge of energy. She quickly packed up and drove to meet Sarah. On the way, she thought about how one decision, to risk everything to uncover the truth, had changed not only her life, but the lives of so many others. At the cafe, Sarah was already waiting for her with a stack of paperwork. Ready for a new adventure? She asked with a smile. Emily looked at her friend and felt her lips spread into an answering smile. Always ready. But first, I have an idea of how we can use my new status to make a bigger change. She told Sarah about Lisa's suggestion and her thoughts on it. That's brilliant, Sarah exclaimed. We can work on two fronts, investigating wrongdoing and changing the system from within at the same time. Exactly, Emily nodded. But we'll need a team to do that. I have a few ideas on that, Sarah said, pulling out her laptop. Remember that hacker who helped us access the Golden Eagle servers? He's expressed a desire to work with us on a permanent basis. Great, Emily smiled. And what about Lisa? She's proven herself to be a reliable ally. Definitely worth including her on the team, Sarah agreed. Oh, and one more thing. Remember that detective who handled your case? Turns out he was very impressed with our investigation. Hinted that if we ever needed any help from law enforcement, he'd be willing to assist unofficially, of course. Emily shook her head, not believing her ears. Who would have thought my little gamble would lead to the creation of an entire network of justice fighters? Well, technically, it was my idea, Sarah teased her. And I thank you every day for it, Emily replied seriously. Without you, I never would have decided to do this. They sat in the cafe for another long time, discussing plans and strategies. When they finally went outside, Emily took a deep breath of fresh air. You know, Sarah, she said, looking out at the city spread out before them, I always thought that being a millionaire was the pinnacle of success, but now I realize that real wealth is an opportunity to make a difference in the world. Sarah smiled and took her friend under her arm. So, ready to start a new chapter? Emily nodded, feeling her energy and determination overflowing. More than ready. Let's change this world. The next few months flew by like a day. Emily and Sarah immersed themselves in working on a new investigation while simultaneously building their team and participating in the Ethics in Business Commission. Investigating a pharmaceutical company turned out to be more complicated than they had anticipated. The company, dubbed VitaPharm, was much more cautious than Golden Eagle and better at covering its tracks. We have a problem, Sarah said one evening, barging into Emily's office. It looks like VitaPharm found out about our investigation. Emily frowned. Where did you get this information? Remember that employee who agreed to cooperate with us? John from Research and Development? He just got fired on some flimsy excuse. Damn it, Emily reprimanded. We need to contact him, make sure he's okay. Already done, Sarah nodded. He's safe, but scared. Says he noticed someone poking around his computer the night before he was fired. Emily thought for a moment. Looks like we need to change tactics. Sarah, contact our detective. It's time to use official channels. While Sarah was doing that, Emily called Lisa. Lisa, it's Emily. I have an important question for you. How difficult is it to organize an unannounced regulatory inspection of a pharmaceutical company? Not difficult, but possible, Lisa replied after a pause, especially if there are reasonable suspicions of irregularities. What happened? Emily outlined the situation briefly. I understand, Lisa said. I can't make any promises, but I have a couple contacts at the FDA. I'll try to probe the ground. Thank you, Lisa. You're a true friend. After talking to Lisa, Emily felt the tension let go a little. She walked over to the window and looked out over the city. The sun was already setting, coloring the skyscrapers in golden tones. Beautiful, isn't it? Came a voice from behind her. Emily turned around and saw Robert Kingsley. Robert, what are you doing here? Sorry for the unannounced visit, he looked embarrassed. Your secretary said you were free. I wanted to talk to you about the foundation. Sure, Emily gestured for him to sit down. How are things going? Better than I expected, Robert smiled. We've already helped several families, but I've run into a problem and I need your advice. They spent the next hour discussing the work of the foundation. Emily was amazed at how much Robert had changed. Gone was the nervousness. Gone was the confidence in his voice and the fire in his eyes. You know, Robert said when they finished discussing, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for everything that's happened. Yeah, it's been hard, but now I feel like I'm really making a difference. Emily smiled. I understand. I have the same feeling. After Robert left, Emily sat in her chair for another long time thinking. Her thoughts were interrupted by a call from Sarah. I have some good news. Our detective friend has agreed to help. He started an informal investigation. Great, Emily said. Keep me posted. The following weeks were filled with hard work. Emily was torn between the investigation, serving on the ethics committee, and helping Robert's foundation. Each day brought new challenges and discoveries. One morning, when Emily had just gotten to the office, an excited Sarah burst in on her. "Em, you need to see this." She placed a stack of documents on the desk. "Our hacker was able to access the internal correspondence of Vitapharm management. This is worse than we thought." Emily began looking through the documents and her face grew increasingly grim. My God, they weren't just faking test results. They deliberately withheld information about serious side effects. "And that's not all," Sarah said grimly. "Look at the dates. They've known about this for over a year, but they kept selling the drug." Emily felt anger overwhelm her. "We have to stop this. Immediately." "But how? We have no evidence we can present in court. These documents are illegally obtained." Emily thought for a moment. "We need to act on several fronts at once. Sarah, contact our detective. Have him use this information for his investigation, but don't reveal the source." Sarah nodded and left the office. Emily dialed Lisa's number. "Lisa, remember we talked about checking out Vitapharm? It's time to take action. I have information that should interest your friends at the FDA." After talking to Lisa, Emily called Robert. "Robert, I need your help. Can you arrange a meeting with patients who have taken Vitapharm drugs, especially with those who have had unusual side effects?" "Sure," Robert replied. "But why?" "I'll explain everything later. Just trust me." The next few days passed like a fever. Emily coordinated her team, meeting with patients, gathering information. She slept several hours a night, but she felt they were close to a breakthrough. Finally, the decisive day arrived. Emily stood in front of the Vitapharm building waiting for the FDA inspectors to arrive. Next to her were Sarah, Lisa, and the group of reporters they had invited. "Are you sure this is going to work?" Sarah asked nervously. Emily took a deep breath. "It has to work. We've done everything we can." At that moment, several black cars pulled up to the building. Out of them stepped men in suits with FDA badges. "Showtime," Emily muttered. The inspectors entered the building and the reporters began to broadcast live. A few minutes later, the CEO of Vitapharm ran out of the building, pale as a sheet. "What's going on here?" he shouted when he saw the cameras. Emily took a step forward. "Justice, Mr. Johnson. That's what's going on here." The next hours passed like a blur. FDA inspectors seized documents and computers. Police arrested several high-ranking company officials. Journalists were scrambling to interview Emily and her team. By evening, when the turmoil had subsided a bit, Emily, Sarah, and Lisa were sitting in a small cafe nearby. "I can't believe we did this," Lisa said as she sipped her coffee. "We're just getting started," Emily replied. "Now the hard part will begin. The courts, the proceedings, the reforms." "But we'll get through it," Sarah said confidently. "Together, we are strength." Emily smiled as she looked at her friends and associates. She remembered how she had felt empty and useless just a year ago. "And now, you know," she said, raising her cup, "I propose a toast to justice, to truth, and to the fact that each of us can make a difference in the world." They clinked cups, and Emily felt a sense of satisfaction and determination overwhelm her. She knew there was more work to be done, but now she had a purpose, a team, and confidence in her abilities. A few months later, Emily stood on the stage of a large conference room preparing to speak at an international conference on corporate ethics. The room was packed with representatives from the world's largest companies, politicians, and activists. "I'm going to tell you a story," she began her presentation. "A story about how ordinary people can stand up to corporate greed and corruption. A story about the importance of not being silent when you see injustice." As she spoke, memories of all the events that had brought her to this point flashed through her mind. About the first investigation in Golden Eagle, about prison, about defeating Vita Farm, about the people she met along the way, the lives they changed. "And so I urge each of you," she continued, looking around the room, "not to be indifferent. Each of us can be a voice for truth. Each of us can fight for justice. Together we can create a world where business serves society, not the other way around." When she finished her speech, the hall exploded with applause. People rose from their seats, greeting her with a standing ovation. Emily saw Sarah, Lisa, and Robert in the front row, smiling and applauding the loudest. After her speech, a group of young activists approached her. "Miss Grant," said one of them, whose eyes burned with enthusiasm, "your story has inspired us. We want to create a similar organization in our country. Can you help us?" Emily smiled. "Of course. Let's discuss it over lunch. I have some ideas." That evening, Emily sat in her hotel room watching the news on her tablet. The headlines were peppered with reports about the conference and her speech. Suddenly, one article caught her attention. "New corporate responsibility bill introduced in Congress. Experts attribute it to a growing movement for ethical business." Emily smiled. It was a small but important victory. She knew there was still a long way to go, but each step brought them closer to their goal. Her musings were interrupted by a call from Sarah. Have you seen the news yet?" "Yeah, I just read about the bill." "No, not that." Sarah could hear the excitement in her voice. "Turn on CNN quick." Emily turned on the TV and saw a breaking news report. The announcer was talking about a major scandal at the tech giant. A data leak has affected millions of users. Company officials are declining to comment, but sources inside the organization say management knew about the security vulnerability but hid the information. Emily felt her heart beat faster. "Sarah, are you thinking what I'm thinking?" "Definitely," Sarah replied. "Looks like we have a new case." "Get a team together," Emily said. "I'm on the first flight out." The next few months passed in intense activity. The investigation of the tech giant was proving to be the most complex they'd ever faced. The company had vast resources and influence, and it wasn't easy to fight. But Emily and her team didn't give up, because now she knew every person can change the world. You just have to find the courage to take the first step.